Hi, welcome to the Summer Blooms watercolor lesson. Before we get started, let's talk about supplies briefly. So for this, basically you're going to need some watercolors, some watercolor paper, and some paintbrushes, but I'll go into a little more detail about the paint that I use. My absolute favorite watercolor brand is Dr. P.H. Martin's Radiant Concentrated Watercolor. This is artist quality, archival. It's beautiful, bright color. It's already liquid, so you don't have to pre-mix or wet anything. It's ready to go in these bottles. It is my absolute favorite. My second favorite brand to use is from, it's a brand called Art Philosophy Prima, and this is the Classics palette. They have a variety of palettes. This is student grade paint, but it is nice and bright. It behaves like watercolor, and I really love it. So those are the two options that I suggest. Of course, you can use whatever you have. As far as watercolor paper, today I'll be using Canson XL watercolor. This is my absolute favorite watercolor paper to work with. I've worked with artist quality paper, I've worked with inexpensive paper, and this is absolutely my go-to. It's inexpensive. It's about, if you get it on sale, $8 a pad here. But you can use any watercolor paper that you like. I just don't recommend doing this if you don't have watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is a must. It's absorbent, which is one of the qualities we need it to be in order to get the techniques that we want. Obviously, you're going to need some water. You're going to need something to put your paint on and mix your paint. I have just a ceramic palette here. It makes it easy to clean. And then you're going to want a watercolor paintbrush. My favorite brand is Royal Aquilon. They are about $20 for a set, but watercolor is very gentle and forgiving on your paintbrushes. So I've had these for several years and they're still in excellent condition. But you can use any paintbrush. Today I'm going to primarily be using this medium size round. It's a number 6. Sizing is not consistent between brands, so use your best judgment when choosing a brush. Just a medium size for the job that you're going to do is fine. And then of course you're going to need some paper towels, and for this lesson especially I am using a heat tool. You can get these at most craft stores. This just really speeds along the process. If you don't have a heat tool or heat gun, you can use a hair dryer, but we're going to do lots of layering, and so having heat available is super important for this lesson. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is choose a main color for your flowers. I'm going to use this color Moss Rose, and it is a beautiful purpley pink tone, but you can choose any color that you want. I've also pulled out a grass green that I'm going to use for the stems. Again, any green is fine. And then what you're going to want to do is decide what accent color you want to work with. So I am going to pull out a violet, and then there is a color that I absolutely love, if I can find it, called Cyclamen. And it is kind of a pinky purple. Where are you? Here it is. And so these three colors are going to play nicely together since they're in the same color family. But I am primarily going to be working with one color. So choose your one main color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some water. And I've got a divided tray here that makes life a little bit easier, but I'm going to put some water in each of these sections. And what I want you to keep in mind as we're working is that we are working with a wash today. So we don't want heavy, thick pigment. We want nice, thin, transparent pigment so that we can layer beautifully. And so I've added, gosh, I don't know how much, maybe like 1 milliliter, just a really small amount of water. We're not going to go heavy with the pigment color. And then I'm going to get some of my main color. So I chose this rose, and I'm just going to put a drop right in there. And I am going to let that thin out, and then you can test it. This right here is very dark. That's too dark for me, so I know I need to add some more water. So we really are thinning this down. We want a wash. Let's test this. All right, I think that's better. Okay, so what we're gonna do first, let's decide where our flowers are gonna go. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I am going to put a dot where I want my flower centers to be. So I've got, if this is my halfway point, I just am going a little slightly below halfway in the right quadrant. And then I'm going to move up top here towards the center a little bit. I will have my larger flower. And I'm going to go with 3 flowers today. And so I'm going to kind of just create a little triangle here and put one right there. You can place your flowers however you want, but these dots will help me visually understand where I want them to be. All right, so we are going to start with our larger petals. So create your wash with your color. And what I'm going to do is dip into this wash. And I'm going to work top to bottom just so I'm not putting my arm in wet watercolor. But we're going to start with our largest petals. So nice thin wash. What I'm going to do here at the top is I am going to create my largest petal, fill it in with that wash color, and then I'm going to come through and I'm going to dip back in my pigment and just add a little bit down here at the bottom, and you see it automatically starts spreading and doing its own thing. That's what we want. All right, so I've got one large petal here. Down here at the bottom, I think maybe I'm gonna do, this will be a nice open flower. So I can do 2 petals at a time. So I'm gonna do my largest right here. Same process, nice big petal. I'm gonna fill it in and then add some color down at the bottom. And then right across, directly across, nice large petal. And then some color right here at the bottom. And then we've got one more to go. I'm going to have this flower be kind of a side view, so one nice large petal. And then tapping in some color. And this will be our first layer. So I'm going to grab this heat gun. I'm going to pause for a moment. This is where you can either step away for a few minutes, let this dry, or zap it with your heat gun, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, now we are going to work in our second layer, and so what I'm going to do is I am going to just tap the tiniest amount of my accent colors into the water I've got here. So I've got a little violet, I've got a little bit of that cyclamen, but this is just going to alter the color ever so slightly. And again, I created a wash, so very little pigment in the water. And then I'm going to come through. I'm going to work with my main color here, the color I've been working with this whole time, this beautiful moss rose. I'm just going to dip right in there, and then I'm going to add a second layer. So on this top flower here, I'm going to come in and the same size petals. I'm going to add 2 on this top flower, so filling in my petal and then adding just a touch down here at the bottom, letting it work its way up. And then over here, notice the overlap in the petals. So tapping in a little bit of color and then letting it blend out. And then over here on number 2, doing the same thing. For the second flower, I am going to choose to have it slightly more closed than the top one. So I'm going to work in 2 petals. And then touching some color down here at the base. To my third flower, keeping the size fairly consistent and overlapping. Same process. My petals, then tapping in the color. And while this is still wet before I dry, I'm going to tap into these accent colors and just add the tiniest amount right there down at the bottom. It's just going to vary up these petals ever so slightly. It's almost not noticeable at this point. So that was step number 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and dry it again. I'm going to pause the video recording and I'll be back in a second. Alright, this is nice and dry now, and so what I'm going to do, my first layer on these top 2 flowers is complete, but down here I need to add in several more petals, and so I can do that. We're following the same process, adding this original color in, tapping some color into the bottom, and then you can tap a little bit of your accent color in there as well. And that just changes up the pattern we're working with, adds variation. So I've added 2 petals. I need those to dry. And then we're going to come back and add the last 2. All right, last 2 petals, same process. You can really start to see this nice, beautiful overlap. And then a little bit of my accent color. And then of course we dry. All right, now that our first layer is completely done on all 3 flowers, we are going to add in layer 2. And so for this layer, I want it to be just a smidge darker, so you can add just the tiniest pinch of pigment in there to darken it up if you want to, or you can work with the same pigment. Either way, it's going to layer beautifully. So for this second layer, again, I'm going to start with my main color, but I'm going to work with my petals just a little bit smaller. So for this one here, I'm going to create just kind of a medium-sized petal that overlaps here. Some of these back petals. I'm going to use my main color to put the initial petal in, wipe off my brush, and then I'm going to tap in just a little bit of that accent color. So I'm really going to change the second layer up. And this petal is facing away. We're getting kind of a side view. I'm going to do the same thing here for the second one. This is a side view flower, so just a medium-sized petal that overlaps the other two with my main color. Wipe off my brush and I can tap in some of that accent color. And then down here, what I'm going to do is add 4 coming out of the center here. So again, working with this main color, 4 smaller petals, adding in that color, wiping off my brush, tapping in just a bit of that accent color down at the bottom. Main color, wiping off my brush, a little bit of that accent. Main color, wipe off, accent, main color, wipe off, accent. And then again, we're going to dry this second layer completely, and then we're going to come back. All right, now we're going to work in a third layer, and this time I think I'm going to go in with just my accent color. I'm going to use this cyclamen, which is the magenta, and what I'm going to do is just create another overlapping layer of petals. I want to make sure the shape is a little bit different, so I may add 2 over here on the front, just varying that shape. So this is my accent color. And then same process, I'm going to add, just tap in some additional pigment down here at the bottom. And you can change up which ones you use. Totally up to you. By choosing colors that play well together, you don't really have to worry too much about how they're going to behave. You can just use whichever ones you want. So we're just adding in another layer of blooms. Just by varying up the shape of the petals slightly, it really adds some beautiful contrast in there, some beautiful variation. So that's our last layer of petals. Again, we're going to dry this and then we're going to move into the stems and some details. So dry once more. All right, so we've got our petals figured out here, and the next thing we're going to want to do is add some stems. So I've chose a grass green. You can choose whatever color you'd like, but I'm going to add my pigment into water again. I want it nice and thin. So we're going to work with a medium wash for this green here. So I've got my green. And what I'm going to do is I've chosen a purple. Purple and, you know, my palette is fairly purple. Purple and green make a little bit of brown, so what I'm going to do actually is pick up some of this purple pigment and mix it in. I don't want it to be like a bright green. I dull it down ever so slightly. So by adding purple in there, it's just going to change the tint just a pinch. And that's what I want. So it's just going to dull it down just a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I've got this same brush, is I'm going to start with the bottom flower here, and I'm going to go over the first petal, but I'm not going to go all the way to the center. So I'm going to start right about here and then just create a straight stem. Once I have my stem, I can just tap in just a little more color. It'll blend out a little bit. And then I'm using very light pressure. I'm going to just create a leaf coming off here. And much in the same way we did with the petals, I'm going to create my leaf with my wash and then just tap in a little more color and let that blend out. And I'm going to do the same thing over here on the other side. I'm going to fill it in with my wash and then tap in some color and let that blend out. And then I'm going to work my way up. So over here on this second flower, it's facing upward. And so what I'm going to do here is at the base, is I'm just going to create kind of just a little base right here at the bottom where the stem meets the flower. So I've got that base, and I'm going to pull it into a petal. Or I'm sorry, into a stem. You know what I mean. Tap in just a little more color, especially down here at the base. And then of course you can add in your leaf shapes. Fill it with a wash. And then tap in your color. Same thing with this third flower that's facing away. We're going to create just that little base at the bottom. And we pull it into a stem. Now for this one, I am going to stop the stem and then find it again down here at the bottom. So this one is not going to go through any flowers. Create that leaf with the wash. Tap in some color. And as these have not quite dried yet, I can tap in more color and just kind of let that watercolor do its thing. So in this manner, you can just kind of make the stems as dark or as light as you want them. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is just create kind of a dark area around the center here. So again, purple and green make a brownish color, so I'm going to add just a little more purple in there. I'm really going to turn this into a dark neutral here. If you don't want to mix your watercolor, you can also just pull in any dark shades you want. This tends to lean towards the violet side. You can use a gray, you can use a dark green, and what I'm going to do is just come back to these dry flowers and I'm just going to tap in some spots, some dots, and that's just going to give this center a little bit of darkness here. For this open bloom. And I don't need to do it for the other two because those are facing away. And then that is pretty much it. So this is all the steps, and what you can do at this point is just add in finishing touches. You know, I maybe could add just a pinch of this dark color in these leaves just to brown it up a little bit. Another fun thing that you can do is while these leaves are wet, you can tap in just a little bit of water, and that will push some of the color away and just create a fun little bloom. I like to do that on leaves. Leaves are kind of blotchy, splotchy, fun little things. So add in your finishing touches, let it dry completely, and then we are finished. So I'm going to pull away this tape, which I just used to hold down my paper. But your blooms are finished and ready to go.